Thank you all for coming to our presentation on how to live in a post-apocalyptic, post-SpringCloud Netflix world. Just a word of introduction. We'll not talk a lot about ourselves, but we both work in the SpringCloud team. I mostly have been working on SpringCloud Load Balancer and SpringCloud Contract these days, but I've also had contributions to other SpringCloud projects.
So my name is Marcin Grzejszczak, and I work together with Olga on the SpringCloud team. I'm the lead of SpringCloud Sleuth and SpringCloud Contract projects. So if you have ever used SpringCloud Contract, you can check out my video course about SpringCloud Contract. I'm also extremely fond of CI/CD stuff. So if you want to talk about this, I'm more than happy to have a chat with you. Since my Twitter handle is absolutely impossible for you to type or pronounce, you can go to my blog, toomuchcoding.com, and find the Twitter handle over there. Okay, so we want to take you on a small journey back in time. So let's go back in time for about like 5 years, right?
That was long ago.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. So five years ago, we were working with Olga in the same company, and we had a monolithic application.
Like
it happens, right?
Everyone then.
Yeah. Nobody has it right now, right? But yeah, we had a monolithic application 5 years ago.
They're long gone.
Yeah. And it wasn't the best monolith, but it wasn't the worst, like something in the middle.
I thought that was an understatement. But
yeah, let's keep it that way. And we knew that we have to do something about this because we had a problem with the velocity, right? So we weren't able to deliver the features as fast as we would like to, or actually the business would like to.
And the build was always red.
Yeah, it happens. The build was red because you had so many modules. So if the build was red and you were contributing to a module that didn't cause the build to be broken, you still could push, right? Because everybody does it like this. That's what we heard. Yeah, I don't think it was a good idea, but still.
And how many developers were there on this single code base?
130 developers coding every day on the single code base, pushing broken code to master. Of course, it never happened in your companies. That was the case in our company.
That never happens anywhere.
So what we decided to do is to go to a conference to find the answer to our problems. And we went to a conference and we heard the term microservices, which was a perfect fit for us because we weren't able to write a proper monolith. So for sure, we will write a proper distributed system, right? That's what we thought that makes perfect sense.
Many have ventured on that journey on that time.
Absolutely,
yeah.
At least showing giving presentations about Hello World applications using some kind of stacks, right? Because
These worked.
We wanted to know exactly what kind of a stack should we use if you want to go towards microservices, and everybody was talking about the Netflix stack, right? So we went to this conference, heard about the Netflix stack, and said, okay, we have to do it, right? Because we have the monolithic application, but not every single feature should go there, right? We have some bounded contexts that are outside of the scope of the monolith. We could for sure have it deployed separately, have a separate deployment pipeline, separately tested, etc., etc. So we came back and said, okay, we're going to use the Netflix OSS stack. But how do you use it, right? I mean, we read the docs.
How do you integrate with Spring Boot?
It wasn't easy. Actually, in the monolith, we didn't even have Spring Boot back then. So it wasn't really easy. So we decided to search for some sort of a higher level abstraction so that our developers can focus on business value, right? Instead of tweaking all sorts of different things to make the Netflix stack work. We found SpringCloud, and that was great, but SpringCloud was in snapshots. And since, of course, we are conference-driven developers back then, we were, and YOLO is our favorite acronym, we actually didn't want to go to production with snapshots. So we had this fabulous idea that we're going to build something of our own, right? Our own abstraction to abstract the Netflix stack, which we did. So we wrote all sorts of tooling around Netflix, Zookeeper as well. We added some tracing to it, and the library was there, open sourced, and we were extremely happy with what it gave us because it allowed us to actually abstract all the technical details, and the developers could focus on writing business value.
It even had external users Not only the
Yeah.
ones that were forced to use it. So.
They were forced to, right? Yeah.
I'm saying the ones that were forced to were
Yeah.
forced to, but it did have some others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the time passed, right? But the business said, like finally found out that we have a separate team writing only tools instead of writing business value. So they asked us, what are you doing, right? You shouldn't be writing any tests, you shouldn't be writing tools. You should be
Writing tools and
business
open
value.
sourcing them.
Yeah, so we said, okay, we need to, because we are already experienced, and we know that in order to get a promotion, we need to know how to delegate, right? So we knew that we have to delegate all our problems to somebody else. So we contributed everything from what we wrote to SpringCloud, right? So the contents of our library went to SpringCloud, and we're extremely happy because we didn't have to support it. We pushed the problem to somebody else, which was great. So back in the days, SpringCloud had quite a few modules. We have a list over there. We can go quickly through.
That's SpringCloud Netflix.
Yeah, I'm talking about SpringCloud Netflix, obviously, and the screen is almost gone. And it's gone. Okay, we're back. So we have let's say the Eureka module, which is, for those who don't know, it was Eureka is a Netflix library server client for service discovery. We had Archaius, which was used for, let's say, distributed configuration, property management. Ribbon, which was a client-side load balancer. I remember when I first read about Ribbon, I was shocked that you can have a client-side load balancer, because why would you need it, right? Load balancer equals an app that load balances stuff for you, right? You shouldn't take care of that. But actually, it makes a lot of sense, because as a consumer of an application, you can have different, let's say, strategies on how to load balance for a given collaborator with whom you're communicating. Zuul, which was a gateway or a proxy.
Router.
A router.
Yeah.
We had Hystrix, right? So implementation of the circuit breaker. Hystrix dashboard, which allowed you to visualize the metrics from the circuit breaker. We had Turbine, which allowed you to gather metrics from different circuit breakers, right? From different applications. And we had special SpringCloud modules that were basing on SpringCloud Stream in order to pass the metrics via the messaging. Time flied, everything was awesome, and suddenly 2016 comes in, and it turns out that Ribbon goes into maintenance mode. I mean, that should never happen, right? It should always be developed, maintained, etc., and suddenly, boom, it's not maintained anymore. What does it mean? From the point of view of Netflix, it meant that if they need to fix some issues or make a release, they will do it. Other than that, they will not make any adjustments to the project. There were companies that built some tooling around Hystrix dashboard. So Netflix said, we no longer maintain Hystrix dashboard, you should migrate to Atlas, and it was a backward incompatible migration, right? You had to migrate.
That was very different.
Yeah, it was a completely different tool. Zuul 1, Zuul 2, the same thing. Zuul 2 was backward incompatible. Archaius 1, Archaius 2, the same thing. And the bomb, Hystrix 2018, it turns out that Hystrix is also not maintained anymore. And we're curious, really, why did it happen, right? And we have a theory, because we're pretty sure that Netflix heard about mine and Olga's story about delegation. And it turned out that Netflix went full into Spring Boot and SpringCloud. So they knew that we're going to do something about their deprecations. So they pushed the problem to us, right? And what is the worst thing about our, let's say, history of delegation is that after we contributed a lot of stuff to SpringCloud
and delegated our problem.
And delegated problem to the SpringCloud, we got hired to work on SpringCloud, which is miserable. So anyways, that's the story behind Netflix. So if Netflix went toward, let's say, to the maintenance mode, we also had to do it. So with Greenwich RC1 release train, we announced that we're also going to go with the maintenance mode. The difference is that we will, for us, maintenance mode means that we're not developing any new features, but we will fix blockers and security issues. And if the community, let's say, talks to us and we agree that some let's say, features could be added, small ones, we can review those small pull requests from the community and merge them and release them. So out of all of the projects, the gray ones are those that went to the maintenance mode. So everything except Eureka went into maintenance mode, right? So now we're going to show you a set of applications, a system. And since we are at a conference, the demo has to be either a financial institution or a beer. This time we went.
That's how far our domain creativity goes.
Yeah, we've been working with open source for a couple of years now, so hello world applications are the maximum we can do. So here we're going to have a credit card situation. A card service gets a request. Although from the business perspective, it makes no sense to actually create a new user when you apply for a card. We do it. And
if there's none.
Yeah, maybe. So we go to the user service via a proxy. And also via a proxy, we're going to go and try to verify the new card, right? And we're going to talk to the fraud verifier. So from the point of view of the old stack, we're going to use Ribbon, for example, in card application service. The proxy was going to be Zuul, and Hystrix dashboard is going to be also there. We're going to have the Turbine app, which is going to aggregate all the metrics from circuit breakers. As a discovery service, we're going to have Eureka. And you can be interested by the ignored service, right? We all have those services that are running on production. We have no source code for that service.
We don't know what they do,
yeah.
But we are afraid to decommission them.
Yeah, it happened. So this is one of those services. And actually, we needed to show you the difference between Zuul and the gateway.
When it comes to whitelisting services.
Exactly. So you're going to see that in a second. OK, so let me show you some code. So we go to the code. Hopefully you can see everything.
Can you see the code?
Is it OK in the back? OK. So we have, let's start with the card service. So we have some sort of a user service client that will send a request in order to reach the user service to create eventually create a new user. And we're going to do it via a proxy. So one of the ways to do it is to use the SpringCloud abstraction called Discovery Client. So Discovery Client comes from SpringCloud. It's an abstraction that allows you to get instances of a given service. So since we're using Eureka, let me show you that. We're using Eureka. So this is Eureka. We have quite a few applications running. So we have the proxy application here, registered under service ID called proxy. So we ask the SpringCloud to retrieve the instances of the application under service ID proxy. Since we have Eureka on the class path, SpringCloud knows how to connect to Eureka and retrieve all the instances. And now one of the most frequent questions, I guess, that we had.
That's funny, but it's really one of the most frequent ones.
Yeah, support questions we got is if you have a REST template and a load balanced REST template that allows you to actually call, let's say, applications that are registered under in service discovery, how can you use both at the same time? So if you have those questions, we're going to solve them right now, once and for all. You can use the qualifier, right? So we have some sort of a configuration in which we have two REST templates. One is load balanced. What that exactly means, you're going to see in a second. The other is non-load balanced. They're both having qualifiers. If you use a qualifier, then you can inject a given REST template. So here we're injecting the one that is not load balanced. Why? Because we are using the abstraction of Discovery Client to retrieve the given instance registered in Service Discovery, and then we are retrieving the full URI of that instance, right? And
can we do it easier?
Yes, we can do it easier. We don't have to do all this, manual retrieval of an instance, service instance, and resolving its URI. We can use Ribbon, for example, right, with a load balanced REST template. So if we go to another, let's say, verification service client, we can see that we are injecting the load balanced REST template, so the one with the @load balanced, and we can call, for example, HTTP fraud verifier app, which, there's no such host as fraud verifier. There's nothing in our local configuration that would resolve it. So what happens is that SpringCloud has an interceptor for a REST template, and it will resolve the host name into a IP of a given service registered in service discovery.
Based by the service ID.
Based by the service ID, which is fraud verifier. And if you wanted to provide your own custom configuration for Ribbon, you could do it with an annotation called Ribbon Client. So here you provide the service ID, which is fraud verifier, and you provide some custom configuration for that particular instance ID. If we go there, we can see that we have a, let's say, a custom rule of, let's say, searching for a given instance. In this case, it's a round-robin rule, right? So that was Eureka, that was Discovery Client, that was Load Balancers Template, Ribbon. Time for Zuul. So we have also a Zuul proxy over here, which was a very, very simple application because it essentially had enable Zuul proxy annotation, that's it. Because the whole configuration of how it should behave was in the application YAML. So the first thing was, yeah, in the properties. So the first thing was that by design, by default, Zuul worked like this, that the first argument after the path was resolved to a service ID. So if you send a request to the Zuul application /example, then this example would be treated as a service ID, searched for in Eureka, and then the path would be resolved. The thing is that all of the endpoints, or all of the services were whitelisted. So whatever you should there at the path was resolved as a service ID, right? So what if you would like to ignore a given service, right? Then you had to configure Zuul to say that there is a list of ignored services. So if you shoot at the Zuul app /ignored/whatever, Zuul would not find that ID, and it wouldn't, let's say, forward the calls to that particular service. However, if you would like to blacklist the ignored service, but whitelist a subset of it, then you have to ignore it and provide that for the ignored service, there is an allowed route. So that was how you could do it in Zuul, right? Everything was whitelisted by design. You would have to blacklist something.
Yeah, and if you forgot to blacklist something that you should have blacklisted, that's where the problem started.
Yeah, that could be a very, very big and costly problem. So last but not least is Hystrix. So we have another service that sends a request. So we're using Discovery Client to retrieve a number of instances. And the whole verifying new user method is annotated with Hystrix command annotation. That means that we are wrapping the whole execution in a Hystrix command. If something goes wrong, we have a fallback method called user rejected. This one that will be called if there are any issues in communicating with the other application. If not, then the result of the calling of REST template here would be returned, right? If the command is executed successfully and in time. So that's pretty much the old stack, right, Olga?
That's what it looked like.
So maybe you would show us right now if it's possible to migrate to the new one and how we can do it.
Yep, sure. Okay. First, let's check if anything works.
Oh yeah, I've forgotten to actually show you if it works.
Let's have a look. Yeah,
at least it works on our machine, right? That's what we can always say.
Okay. So, first I'm just going to...
No, let's maybe show the, because I've forgotten to show
you want to show
the Hystrix dashboard.
You're right. So let's run
yeah.
some requests.
Yeah, we're running a benchmarking tool called AB that sends plenty of requests right now. And if we go to the Hystrix monitor, we should see that, you know, there's plenty of requests, the circuits are closed, everything works fine, the communication is healthy, there are no issues. So we managed to prove to you that using the old stack with Ribbon, with Zuul, with Hystrix, with Eureka, we are able to write an application that actually works as a Hello World application. Now we can migrate to the new stack.
Okay, so let's first kill all these apps.
So who had a similar architecture? Good, like 10 people.
Okay. So that was what our old stack looked like. And now let's see how we can transition from this. And that's our new stack. So before we had Ribbon, now we'll be having SpringCloud Load Balancer. Where we had Hystrix, we will be using Resilience 4J with SpringCloud's own abstraction, which is SpringCloud Circuit Breaker. We will also switch from Zuul to SpringCloud Gateway, which is a way more robust tool. And we will also add Micrometer everywhere to be able to monitor our apps and to be able to monitor everything, actually, not only our circuit breakers. Because that was sort of a quaint idea to only have a dashboard for just circuit breakers and then monitor everything else elsewhere. So we will just use Micrometer, we will use Prometheus for these metrics, and we will still use Eureka Service Discovery. Since this was not put into maintenance mode, there's absolutely no need to switch away from that. So these apps are not running anymore. I'm just going to close this window and switch to the new stack. Let's first run everything. OK. So while this is running, let's start with the first thing on our list, and that is switching from SpringCloud Netflix Ribbon to SpringCloud Load Balancer. And I'm very happy to tell you that we are now able to tell much more about this than we were able to show when we were giving this presentation before. So then only a few things work now. There is a lot of more integration. So we have it here, and of course we have to add a starter first. And this starter is very young. We have just merged it. I think we merged it around 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's very fresh, so please test it when we are in milestone, and we can still modify things and fix anything if necessary. And the other important thing is this property. So we are very strict about not breaking backwards compatibility in minor releases. And since Hoxton is not a major for us, we couldn't just make it to automatically switch to SpringCloud Load Balancer. So even if you add the starter, but you have a ribbon in your class path, we will still use ribbon. If you want to use SpringCloud Load Balancer, you add the starter, but then you also need to switch this property, SpringCloud Load Balancer ribbon enabled, to false. And if you do not have ribbon in your class path, we will just use this SpringCloud Load Balancer out of the box. So let's go to this config. As you can see, this looks pretty similar. We have actually switched from the REST template to the web client builder. And up until just recently, that was the only thing that could work. So SpringCloud Load Balancer only works with web client builder. Now it also works with REST template. So you could still have REST template there, and we would use SpringCloud Load Balancer underneath. And SpringCloud Load Balancer is fully reactive, built on top of Project Reactor, but still it has a client that will work fine with REST template. And another thing that has changed here is this. So the annotation, before we had ribbon client, now had load balancer client. And we are passing some custom configuration. We will go back to this config. Now let's see how we are using it. So this is our builder. And what we need to do is actually build a web client from that, and then we can execute our requests and their load balance. So as you see, we are going to pass the service ID and not an actual host. It works same as in the previous example, but the load balancing implementation used underneath is different. There is another way to use SpringCloud Load Balancer with web client. So if you do not want to use the annotation, the load balanced annotation, what you can do is inject Reactor Load Balancer Exchange Filter function. And of course, this is provided by us in the auto configuration. You don't need to configure it yourself. You can just auto wire it, and it will be there. And then what you need to do is pass this function when you are building a web client, similarly as you pass any other custom filter to your web client. So this is a call to the ignored service, and As the service is ignored, we are actually not going to use whatever it returns, but I just want to show you that we will use it and with this different setup. And also I want to show you that we have custom configuration. So our custom configuration is only for this ignored service. Now, an important thing to know here is that you don't need this annotation and you don't need to pass this configuration class. You can just use the defaults, and probably now this will be the most usual thing to do since we are not yet providing that many different load balancing implementations. But I wanted to show you how to do it anyway, so if you want to adjust it, you can. So this is our call. We are using Webflux here, but as we've said, we could still use REST template. And then we have our custom load balancer configuration. So I'm actually just instantiating a different implementation of the load balancer here. And as I've said, it will not be of much use now. However, we want to add more algorithms and more implementations. And then you will be able, in your class configuration class, you will be able to specify if you want to use a different algorithm, same as you were able to specify if you wanted to use a different rule before. So that's an implementation. And the details are not that important here because we will be providing this. I just wanted to show that we'll be logging that this is actually done from the custom implementation. So that's our load balancer. Now, the second change we should do is switching to SpringCloud Gateway. And I would say this is the most mature of all these new projects that I'm presenting. And also, this is a project that is already heavily used in production by really big companies. So if you are a bit in doubt whether to switch to some of these things since they are new and some of them are just in milestones, that's not the case with Gateway. It has been in GA. It can be safely used. And Gateway is reactive. It's built on top of Reactor Netty. So let's see how we add it to our app. Let's just close this. So first, again, we need a starter. Now, one thing to remember is that it's best to keep Gateway as a separate app and to sort of abstract this piece of your infrastructure and just allow it to do routing. It's not always a very good idea to keep it with the rest of your application code. So the best thing is to have a Gateway app that is just doing that, routing. Also, because if you put non-reactive web starters with the reactive one, the application won't run. You will get exceptions. So the best thing is just to keep it minimal, add the Gateway starter, make a new app, add some service discovery. In this case, it is Eureka. And then we are adding the possibility to collect metrics and the actuator. So this is our Gateway app. It is actually a simple Spring Boot application. But all the magic is in the setup. So for our Gateway app, we have the app running, but we need to provide the routes. And unlike with Zuul, where it was implicitly adding all the routes based on your service IDs, actually in Gateway, you need to pass the routes. And even though it might seem like a bit more work to get done, I think it is so much safer. And it's also not a whole lot of work because we can use wildcards, like here. So we pass routes. And for every route, we pass an ID. And we pass a URI. So here, we can pass an actual host where we want it to go. But we want to show load balancing in this example. So what you can do is simply prefix the URI with LB protocol and then pass the service ID. And we will use SpringCloud load balancer underneath to get this done for you. And then you have your predicates. So predicates are all the conditions that a request has to match to enter the route. In this case, we're just specifying the path, and we're using the wildcard. So whatever is under fraud verifier will be directed via this route. And the second thing we have are filters. Filters allow us to modify our requests, and also our responses, actually. And this is something I will show you in more detail just very shortly. But to show you that we are sort of reproducing the same setup that we had with Zuul. What we need to do here is strip the prefix. Why? Because we need this fraud verifier service ID to match our request to a particular route and via the load balancer send it to a particular service. But then once I'm in fraud verifier, all endpoints in the fraud verifier application, they do not actually start with /fraud verifier. So I'm just stripping it. And then there's a retry filter. This will actually retry 3 times if the request fails. And finally, there's our ignored service. So as we've said here, nothing is added implicitly. So what I need to do is just add this one path without any wildcards. And then I have a whole service that is ignored with only one endpoint that is allowed. So this is OK. But I don't know about you. I don't really like working with things where syntactic elements are white spaces and indentations. It's hard for me. So I much prefer our Fluent API. This is available in Java and is available in Kotlin. And what you do, you also add routes. That's something that we would expect. But the nice thing here is that as it's a Fluent API, we can work with auto-completion. And Marcin and I, we have very many positive traits, but good memory is absolutely not one of them.
Nope.
Yeah. So if the ID can suggest me what to do, I want it. So as you can see, here we are passing our predicates. We have path. And for the predicates, we can use Booleans. So we can join conditions, or we can also have separate conditions, yeah, that either one of them is matched. And then, for example, for this example, we are doing path, and we're also matching by the method, so only method post. But of course, there are many more predicates, so basically, whatever you could imagine. We could be using host. We could be using even time, that this request has come before that time or between this time and another time. We can be matching headers, methods, whatever you would reasonably expect here.
Can you write your own?
Yeah, it's not that difficult to implement. And also, you have the Fluent API here. And the filters to me are an awesome thing because they allow you to do everything. So in Zuul, we had sort of, like, it was really good for its times. It was awesome. But it was sort of a rudimentary routing. You could tweak some things via a few properties that were contained in one class. That was it. Here you can do anything with your request and also with your response. So you modified. We've shown stripping prefixes, but you can also add parameters, change URIs, work with fallback headers. You can modify request body, and you can also modify response body. You can set statuses. You can change redirects. You can do whatever you want, I would say, because you can also easily implement your own filters. And when it comes to the filters that we provide, we have currently around more than 20, actually. And we are actively working on it. So if we see that the community wants a particular filter, it is going to be, well, I cannot say 100%, but if we get many votes, we will consider it, and it's very likely that it can get added. And then finally, we have our load-balanced URI. And also, until this Hoxton milestone 3, that worked with Ribbon underneath. Now we have started to use SpringCloud Load Balancer, a fully reactive implementation underneath with that. OK, so that was Gateway. There's one more super exciting thing about Gateway and about what is available in the milestones, which is that Gateway now works with RSocket. And RSocket, if you're not familiar, is moving the reactor streams programming paradigm on the level of network. And we are going to have a presentation. Actually, Spencer Gibb and Cora Iberclyde are going to talk about this today. And if you're interested, you should really go. It's a very new thing, and I think very exciting that Gateway is already supporting this. So that's something to see. And now let's see. the last change we will be making. So this is also a very fresh thing. We have SpringCloud Starter Circuit Breaker. And the circuit breaker has various implementations. We don't want to use Hystrix here. We will be using Resilience4j. And for Resilience4j, there is also additional reactive starter. So you can use both, but as our user service is using REST template, we'll just go with this one. And SpringCloud Circuit Breaker has also just been moved from Incubator, has been merged into the Hoxton milestones, and also it supports Resilience4j, it supports Sentinel, and it also supports Hystrix, and supports Spring Retry. So that's what we have. How do we use this? So that's our method. Before we had the Hystrix command here, and we were using that. And now we want to use Circuit Breaker Factory. So we just inject it, and we could just auto-wire it. It's an injected bean. And of course, again, we do not need to set it up. It comes with the auto configuration. So once we have this bean, the only thing we really need to do is create a circuit breaker. So what we do is we pass an ID to it, and then we specify with lambdas what we want to happen. So first part is what we are wrapping in the circuit breaker, so the part that will be circuit broken. And in this case, before we had the Hystrix command annotation on the entire method. Now, I am not really expecting to have that many issues with resolving the URI, building the URI, or adding query parameters. So I'm only going to wrap the actual call with that. And then we, as in every good circuit breaker, we need to have a fallback. So we need to pass a method. If a throwable occurs, that's what we should fall back to. So this should work exactly the same way, just using the new stack. Now, these are the defaults, but we can also customize our circuit breaker. And doing this is also very simple. We just have to create our own bean of type customizer of a circuit breaker factory. So here we have Resilience4j circuit breaker. So obviously that would be this type. And you can work with a lot of setup here. What is nice that you get a builder. So what you can do with your configuration is just pass a new builder. And the good part of the builder is that it will allow you to set whatever the actual implementation allows you to set. So if you're using Resilience4j, you will be able to set the properties that Resilience4j allows you to set. So as you can see here, this time limiter config that we are setting up here, this is actually Resilience4j stuff. But you can pass it via the Fluent API, set out just this. So we just want the timeout duration changed. And then for all the rest, we just want the defaults. So that's a very easy way to do this. And there is one more thing that you can see here, but these are the metrics setup. And this is something that Marcin is going to talk more about.
Yes. So since, like Olga mentioned, previously we had the circuit, Hystrix circuit breaker, and we're gathering metrics and sending them via Turbine to the dashboard, etc. Right? So, like Olga said, we didn't like this idea that you have two different things. One, let's say, the micrometer to gather metrics, and the separate thing to gather the Hystrix metrics, right? So what we decided to do is to gather the circuit breaker metrics via the micrometer support. So what we had to do first is to add in the POM a dependency, which is Resilience4j micrometer, because Resilience4j as such knows how to communicate with micrometer. And the second thing we had to do, which is, I wouldn't call it necessarily a hack. I would say that there's a certain challenge that we're facing using SpringCloud Circuit Breaker, but we will...
Just for the time being.
For the time being, we need to write a couple of lines of code that will not be necessary in the future. What the problem is that for metrics, we need to configure the circuit breaker registry, which is not a problem. The problem is that we have to add a circuit breaker customizer for every single circuit breaker we're having. So if we have 25, we will have to provide 25 IDs where we say, and this is the Resilience for J Micrometer integration, that off-circuit breaker registry, we want to bind to meter registry from micrometer. So we would have to do it 25 times. So for sure, we're going to provide some sort of an automated approach. We're going to say that by design, if you have let's say, a circuit breaker with any ID, we're going to bind it to a micrometer, right? Right now, we have to be explicit about it, right? So here you have the verify new user ID, and the same verify new user is over here when you are actually creating a circuit breaker. It works. You have, let's say, a little bit more to write, which isn't very terrible, but we're gonna for sure manage to fix it in the future. So maybe let's run some.
Yeah, let's check if it still works after switching it. Yeah, it has. So I'm happy that the demagogues were with us, but there's one more thing I wanted to show you here. So when we go back here, you can see that actually we have used a different load balancer implementation. So basically the configuration that we have passed via load balancer client has worked. And we have called the ignored service from that. Okay, and now let's run some more requests.
And let's check out Prometheus. Here we can see the not found Grafana dashboard. And now we have the found one. So as you can see, we have one, let's say, entry point to our metrics, which is micrometer, and one output, which is Prometheus, and the Grafana dashboard. So over here you can see the metrics from the gateway. They come out of the box. You don't have to add any code for the metrics to be there, and they are prefixed with gateway. Here you have the verifying user manual, which was a manually created metric inside of our code. And those that are prefixed with Resilience for J circuit breaker are those coming out of the box from Resilience for J due to the fact that we've managed to bind the circuit breaker registry to the meter registry of micrometer. So it's extremely simple. No longer do we need various tools, different tools, to gather conceptually the same thing, which are metrics. You can use micrometer with, for example, Prometheus to gather those.
Okay. Let's go back to our presentation. Is this all that we have to switch? Not exactly. There's one more thing. And SpringCloud config server has been with us for a really long time. There are a lot of presentation on it. There's a lot of documentation, and we are not going to make a detailed demo here. Also, there are not many people that actually have SpringCloud Netflix Archaius directly in their projects. It's rather a transitive dependency via other SpringCloud Netflix projects. So if you are using it, we suggest you opt out of it and, for example, use SpringCloud config server for that. And if you just see it in the transitive dependencies, it's ours to deal with. Should you make the change? So we are still going to support the maintenance mode apps for some time, at least until the end of this year. The way it's going, I would say longer. But if your application, if your application is going to be very short-lived and you're going to decommission it at the end of this year or at the beginning of the next year, it probably doesn't make that much sense, even though it's fun. But yeah, probably you don't need to. And if not, if you're working on something that will run longer, you should start about making changes. The first thing you should switch, as I've said, would probably be the config server and definitely SpringCloud Gateway. When it comes to load balancer and circuit breaker, they have been added in milestones. So we would suggest you anyway, if you have some use cases, some tooling up, something where you are not afraid of running it on milestones, please try it and let us know so we will be able to fix any issues if they appear. As I've said, we will be adding more stuff here. So there's a lot of more to come for SpringCloud Gateway with our socket. When it comes to the load balancer, we are adding other algorithms. One interesting thing that we have in issues and we are going to work on very shortly is the power of two choices implementation for SpringCloud load balancer. And if you're interested in that, you can catch me later on and we can chat about it. You can also very soon expect to have the SpringCloud starter load balancer and SpringCloud starter circuit breaker at start.spring.io. So they're not there yet, but they should come. And there is still an elephant in the room, which is the question that we keep getting, which is, I have never added ribbon, but I have ribbon in my class path. So we are aware that SpringCloud Netflix projects are still a big part of our starters. And we are providing implementations to change it with. So you should definitely switch in your own implementations. But we are also switching for the functionality and for the defaults. However, we cannot completely remove them, and you will be getting them in the class path until we have a major release. Because if we remove them now, we'll break compatibility. So we are deprecating them. We will continue deprecating them, and we are going to add replacements, but we will remove them when we have a major release. So that's something to keep in mind. Another thing, also for the service discovery starter, SpringCloud starter load balancer is already available there, so you can give it a try. All this code can be found, so we will share our slides, and there you will find the link. And the branches that we have shown was the master branch for the new stack, and obviously the old stack branch for the old stack. You can find, we will still share the slides, so don't worry, but you can find also more branches that, for example, have SpringCloud load balancer working with console, or SpringCloud load balancer working with non-reactive stack with REST template, some other things that you can see if you're interested in it. And check our projects, please, and contribute and collaborate with us. So we are super happy to get issues and discussions and PRs. Just make sure that before you file a PR, you make an issue and you discuss it with us.
And you read the docs?
Yeah, we respond on Gitter and on Stack Overflow, but we request you if you could first read the docs. It's not that popular, but it's still worth it. And OK, let me wrap it up, and then we'll take questions. So I want to recommend 2 more presentations. Actually, the first one has already taken place, but if you are interested in Kubernetes with SpringCloud, you can probably in 2 weeks or so, the recordings will be available, and definitely it's worth to see a recording of that. And the one that many, many people are waiting for is the reactive architectures with our socket and SpringCloud Gateway. So let's go to the questions. If anyone is, yeah?
With retry, is there any special considerations or with retry?
So the question was, with Spring Retry, are there any considerations on how to use it?
Okay.
So as Olga said, there was a starter in SpringCloud Circuit Breaker that allows you to use Spring Retry. So as for the defaults, you would just add the dependency to SpringCloud Starter Circuit Breaker retry, and then you would get, let's say, the defaults for Spring Retry.
So you would just be able to work with the abstraction, and only if you want to adjust particular configuration, you can do it. And also, SpringCloud Gateway does support retries via the filters.
The idea of the SpringCloud Circuit Breaker project and the load balancer one was to, let's say, abstract it in such a way that if in 5 years Resilience4j gets deprecated, it's going to be much easier to,
We've learned from what has happened.
Yeah,
we've learned from the past.
It's like we wanted to have something similar that we have with service discovery, right? If right now it's enough for you to change the class path entry from, for example, Eureka to console and change some properties if necessary, and you don't change a single line of code. I doubt that it's going to be such a thing if you migrate from one circuit breaker to another, because still you have code that you can configure, right? You have some sort of customizations.
Unless you don't configure it much, then yes.
Still, even if you do, that's going to be just the configuration that you store in a single place that you will migrate from one implementation to the other. It's not going to be that you have, the implementation roaming for your code, right? So that was the very idea. So with that, if you're using the abstractions, just put in Spring Retry, and if you don't customize it, there's nothing else you have to do. Yeah, there was a question?
Okay.
So the comment was that we didn't mention anything about the Feign client.
Yeah, the one thing, SpringCloud Open Feign was not in maintenance. So it's still there as it was. One thing that will happen is we will have SpringCloud Load Balancer support for the Feign client. So currently it's only Ribbon. It will be SpringCloud Load Balancer as well. Otherwise, unless anybody wants to put it in maintenance mode, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, it's not anymore part of Netflix. It's supported by independent maintainers, and they are working on it. So I don't see any change coming in the near future other than adding this additional support. We will definitely keep it up to date. We'll be upgrading to newer versions when they appear. So that's business as usual.
Yeah, there was a
Yeah.
question.
With Istio and Envoy as the service mesh coming in, the discovery part of it is kind of delegated to the service mesh, and how does that fit in with SpringCloud Gateway?
So the question was, or the comment was about the service meshes, that if you're using service meshes, then you can delegate some work to it, to the mesh, instead of, let's say, other tools. So the answer to that is, it depends. So now you should ask a question on what. So it depends on how you actually want to use it, because some people want to work with meshes, some dislike it, some like to write hundreds of lines of YAML, others prefer code. So if there are places where the mesh is a better fit for you, you just go ahead and use it, right? If you want to have, let's say, want to use the code and write, let's say, use the reactive part of the gateway and configure it more thoroughly with code or even with YAML, just go ahead and use it. I think it's a matter of choice and a matter of preference.
Yeah, and what works in your organization, because in some organizations you will have big operations department and they will work with the service mesh and will like it, but in some organizations the developers prefer to have a lot more influence also on the infrastructure, and then you would rather use our stack. Also, that will be very talked about in details in the RSocket plus Gateway presentation, but there is also work going on to allow Gateway clusters to with RSocket to work as a replacement for service discovery and also for service meshes. So it is an alternative approach that gives more power to the developers, but of course it might be the case that in your company a better idea is a service mesh. So it depends where you want to put the weight, on the operations or on the developers.
The challenge is we have so many services now, and from one application is 100 services. Managing all of them and injecting all this code into each of them, we are heavily invested today in Zuul and the Hystrix and all of the Eureka. So if we wanted something that magic out of the box, where the application team would have worry about it, but still get that functionality, the traceability, observability.
Yeah, so probably in your case, when you are going to make a switch, Zuul is something you should go away from. But now probably is the time in your organization to see if you want to go in Gateway and RSocket and all this reactive stack, or maybe no. It's completely fine if in your organization the service mesh is a better idea.
And mind you, with Istio, since I'm working also with distributed tracing, remember that with if you have just a service mesh, and you want to do simple tracing, that's going to work. But if you want to have a more gradual one, it's not going to work, because you have to, let's say, be sure that if you want to ensure that, for example, when a new thread is spawned, the context is passed, you still need some sort of tooling, like for example SpringCloud Sleuth, to allow you to pass the tracing information. If you're just relying on a mesh, or let's say on a proxy, that will not work, right? Adam?
More questions?
So the question was if we are planning to add SpringCloud's own service registry. I am not familiar with such plans.
We are not aware of it, but definitely the Gateway plus RSocket approach can replace service registry.
Again, it's not something that we're building in terms of the service discovery, because we're just leveraging what the protocol allows you, right?
Yeah.
So we're just getting it, as a benefit.
Integrations and support, and that's what we've done. But A lot of times we decide to have our own things when what is available is no longer meeting the needs of our users. And for now, with the service discovery, we didn't have, I think, that many
Correct.
requests to replace it. Yeah?
I have a question. Like currently, you talk about like Spring Gateway, right? And with the PCF, currently there's no router. So if you deploy to that PCF,
Okay.
right? So what is like the network flow? Is it to the Go router or Spring Gateway or?
So the comment was that if you're using PAS, you have the Go router that is routing the traffic. So with SpringCloud Gateway, what happens then, right? So that was the question. Again, it depends, because if you have container-to-container networking, you don't go via the Go router. You can have the gateway, you're going to talk directly to the gateway. Even if you go via the Go router, you can go to the gateway in order to do more sophisticated routing or request processing, right? So these are two different things. If you have a very simple thing, you can go, let's say, just go via the Go router because it's the platform that's going to, let's say, redirect the call to the proper instance. If there's something more sophisticated, and that's, I guess, 99% of your cases, you would go with some sort of a API gateway mechanism, for example, SpringCloud Gateway.
And also the SpringCloud Services team is now very much working on Gateway. There will be some announcement made and also presentations about it. So I think the plan is they are going to show also some things that are additional improvements for the commercial products. So you will find out definitely during Spring 1 platform.
With the PKS, is there any Go router or there's no Go router? We have to rely on the Spring Gateway.
With PKS? So in Kubernetes, I'm not familiar of anything like a Go router exactly, right? You can leverage the Kubernetes, let's say, mechanisms to have, like services that will redirect the traffic to a proper pod. But still, you can have abstractions like SpringCloud Kubernetes to have your applications, let's say, work with whatever Kubernetes provides. But I'm not familiar.
But easier to handle.
Yeah, they're easier to handle. I'm not familiar with anything like porting of the Go router, since I think it's already inside Kubernetes as such, right? Come again? Yeah, exactly. So it's already inbuilt. There's not going to be anything ported from PAS. Any more questions? Yeah.
Yep.
What about distributed configuration, like for example for the gateway? Is there a good practice on that?
So the question was about the distributed configuration, for example, for.
Not the distributed, but just the configuration that you showed.
So the configuration for the SpringCloud Gateway, right?
Yep, you can have external configuration.
So you can put it in YAML and store it there. You can write it in the code, as Olga mentioned.
And you can work with the config server.
And yeah, so you can put it in as a configuration somewhere in a Git repository, and then SpringCloud config can serve it, and the gateway can, upon starting, fetch the configuration.
Yeah, and you can
run.
dynamically change it if your configuration and the source wherever you are taking the data from is changed. So that is also supported.
If you're doing, is there doing configuration in the YAML file or doing it through Java? Is there a precedence to be doing it? Can I do it both?
Yeah, as you've seen in the
So I'm going to
example.
repeat the question.
Oh, sorry.
So the question was, you can do it in YAML, you can do it in the code. Is it a precedence between one and another, and can you have both?
Yeah, so as you've seen in the example, we had both. There's absolutely no problem. The only thing to keep in mind is there are some filters that are only available with the code configuration and not in YAML. There's a number of filters, I think, modifying the bodies, the ones which are more complex. Otherwise, if you don't need this filter, if you prefer YAML, you can use YAML. It will work just the same. That is simply a bit easier to write for a lot of people.
Yes.
Yeah, you
that's
add the
added.
routes. So you can add some routes via YAML and then add some routes via the builder.
Because you would have to start coding in YAML, right? If you want to have those more sophisticated
Yeah.
filters. And I guess we have enough YAML for now.
Coding and the configuration YAML, so which one takes precedence?
So the question was, if you have code and the YAML, which one takes precedence?
That's a good question.
It depends. We're going to check it.
Yeah, we need to check it.
Go ahead.
The previous one is SpringCloud or Kubernetes. They
They show what?
Yeah, we will have SpringCloud load balancer support for Kubernetes also. Yeah, that's very much shortlisted on my list, so it is coming. Okay.
So the comment was that there were issues with the compatibility between SpringCloud and Spring Boot. Of course, it's impossible because we make no mistakes. But assuming theoretically that there was such a problem, the comment was that in the POM, because I wasn't able to scroll fast enough for Erden not to see it, there was an explicit hard dependency on resilience4j. And that's because we haven't yet properly set up the POM of circuit breaker resilience4j integration in SpringCloud. It's gonna, of course, obviously you have to have a single, let's say, set of dependencies in the same version. That was only because you couldn't see that I have added the resilience4j version anywhere but the micrometer support. Only there was the fixed dependency because it doesn't come with a BOM. So we will have to absolutely check it out. So when we were preparing this presentation, you could have seen some comments in the code where I said that it just can't work like this, right? And another comment was, exactly, I shouldn't need to know which version of resilience4j to use. So when I was writing the code, I had to click to see, oh, it's this version of resilience4j, so I'm going to copy it. It's not going to be that way.
This has just been migrated. So this is one of the projects that have just come and are only available in the milestones for now. So we are still working on it. Yeah.
Where was the question here?
SpringCloud Gateway right now supports the Registry as a circuit breaker.
Yeah.
Have any other circuit breaker?
Yeah, we will have to have.
So the comment was that SpringCloud Gateway supports Hystrix. Will we have any other circuit breakers? Absolutely, we're going to migrate to the SpringCloud load balancer.
We are committed to provide replacements to all the maintenance mode projects. So we were not doing it before because we were waiting for merging SpringCloud circuit breaker from the incubator to Hoxton release train. So that has happened just now, just a few weeks ago. But once this is done, we will absolutely want to provide it.
It's our priority. Yeah, go ahead. So the comment was that we've shown Archaius and that the migration path is from Archaius to SpringCloud config server. And the question is if we can show some examples of what config server provides?
No. So data replacement to the property file.
Yeah, so if you were storing your properties in Zookeeper, for instance, and you're using Archaius to fetch it, etc., now you should be fetching them from config server.
So you have a property files, but you can manage them and have them, for example, in a GitHub repository and use config server to automatically fetch them for you and also check whenever there's any change. So that you would be able to track the changes and then update your properties.
Any more questions?
One of the challenges we had with SpringCloud service is that it's backed by a DFS or Bitbucket or something that is a load management tool, and availability was impressive, especially when containers can come up in the night. So I think there is a newer implementation of SpringCloud that was actually going to do a clone of it and not have it drive dependency to the real workplace.
You're talking about, so the comment was that if you're using SpringCloud services and you have the config server there, right, you have a tight dependency on some sort of a, let's say, external system that can go down, right? And if there's some sort of a fix for that or replacement. From what I know, there is work being done or finished already that will deal with that you're going to have a local clone or something like this. And yeah. So from my understanding, from my knowledge, there either it's already done or it's in progress, the fix for that. But you can find somebody from the SpringCloud services team around and ask them.
Yes, they will have more information on the commercial products because we really only work on the open source ones. So they will be the best ones to give you the updated information.
Go ahead.
I saw on your slide for the SpringCloud circuit breaker that you had the time limiter and the circuit breaker config. Is there plans to support the other things for resilience for J, like head?
So the comment was that in the code we had we're using the builder with some resilience for J configuration, and do we plan to support all of those configuration options, right? I think that the builder comes from resilience for J as such, right?
The builder not, but the options,
the options.
So this is it. Then we have the circuit breaker config. And
so whatever the and it comes from
resilience for J. So the builder allows you to just easily handle the other configurations, to have fluent API, same for every circuit breaker. But we provide whatever is in that actual implementation that gets provided.
I think you would have.
No.
Yeah, I was just trying to let's rapidly find the answer to your question in such a way that you can access those properties. For sure, it's possible to.
They're via the circuit breaker config.
Yeah. So the answer is yes. Since we
so
are already
here,
using resilience for J,
you have the circuit breaker config method, and here you pass the actual config that you want to use.
Yeah. Any more questions? Yeah, go ahead. So the comment was that if there's an app that currently doesn't use neither the load balancer nor the circuit breaker, what should they use when they want to start using it, right? Should they use the new stuff or the old stuff?
So I would recommend using the new ones once they enter GA. So now we are at milestone 3. We will be probably issuing release by the end of this year. So that would be
I would just add that you can start testing it absolutely with milestones. If things work fine for you, just continue.
And Gateway, definitely, you can already start using it. Starters are there, but I just want to warn you that this is a milestone. So when it's GA, then we sort of say, we think now it's ready to use. When it's milestone, you can use it, but we still expect to be getting issues in GitHub and having to fix things.
And the starters are already there, so you can already migrate to the milestones.
Yeah, you can test it in some. If you have an app that you only use for your internal tooling, why not try it out and check if it works? Okay, we add one property. So just we switch it to false, ribbon enabled. And then we add starter. And then you can use just only the load balanced annotation, and that's it. The other things I have shown are fully optional. So you can just use the defaults. I have shown more things because so people can know if they want to customize something, or later when we are going to add more implementations, where can they put that they want to use a different implementation. But you can just use the defaults. The default one currently is round robin, the one we support.
So we have 1 minute left, so I guess one last question if anybody has it. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that SpringCloud Gateway is reactive. If my upstreams are non-reactive, should I stick with Zuul or should I?
No, not a problem.
So the comment was that SpringCloud Gateway is reactive, so if other apps are non-reactive, should we use Gateway? Absolutely, because in general, if you write the filters or let's say create the routes, you don't even see that it's reactive, right? It doesn't really matter for you because the fact that the gateway is reactive is an implementational detail. It doesn't matter.
What you shouldn't do is put a gateway starter somewhere where you have other code. So you should keep the gateway app separate, and then you can just pass requests to it. So you don't care, once you do an HTTP call, you don't care if Gateway will handle it reactively or not. It will just end up routing this call somewhere else.
Okay, thank you very much. We're out of time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.